Hello everyone, it's NanoHawk Day and a new sort of take on the whole 65mm whoop design and something I'm stuck on. It might be 65mm, it might be prop protected, but when you fly it, it doesn't feel like a whoop. And that might be a good thing.
You see mine has a bunch of glue all over the camera area. We'll cover that in a bit. The motors are labeled on the top, and they are 0802 19,000 kV motors. These are newly designed Emax AIO props. Our all-in-one flight controller is an F4 with a 5 amp ESC. It also contains the receiver. And the little daughter board right there by the USB is our VTX, which is 25 milliwatts. And our camera is the Runcam Nano 3 with the version 2 lens. Our battery connector is the new GNB27. The batteries are held on with these two rubber bands. We have a bottom carbon fiber plate. It comes with two full sets of props, but I lost two of them, and these are kind of messed up. It comes with one Emax 300 milliamp battery, a USB charger, and to charge those batteries, they have these adapter leads that goes from PH20 to GNB27. In our little baggie here, we have a tiny little screwdriver, a couple more rubber bands, and some extra screws. Also in the box is their support card and social medias. And last but not least is stickers. Before the glue and bashing it about, mine weighed 20.65 grams. And it looks like my glue didn't add too much weight. With the Emax 300 milliamp battery, it weighs 29.5 grams. It looks like that carbon fiber bottom plate is 1.5 millimeters thick. And it does measure 65 millimeters motor post to motor post. So we're going to start out with the inside flight. That's kind of my forte. That's where I kind of expect all whoops to fly, but I know that people fly them outside, so we will also have an outside flight. So in this video, not only will you see the flight you're looking at and the outside flight that I mentioned, but you'll also see some LED gates. I'll show those in this video as well, something that might be interesting to some of you. If you've been following the channel, you're probably tired of looking at LED gates. I think I've had 3 videos on LED gates. LED gates are fun, and we'll talk about them when we get to it. I think this flight comes in around 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I did make some adjustments on my power settings in beta flight to where when I land, I come in at 3.5 volts per cell, or in this case, there's only one cell, so 3.5 volts when I disarm. That's my goal when I fly these things, all quads, is that I try to land to give you what I think is considered a pretty good voltage to stop at. There'll be a number of things that I'll talk about during these flights that I think if I didn't fly these things so much before I did a review, I probably wouldn't have learned. One of the things is that I don't think the props are all that durable. They didn't break, but the pitch got bent up a little bit, and the props just got to a point where even inside, every once in a while, I would find that I had to swap out a prop or more than one prop in order to get a good, clean, stable camera view. And that's why I have the glue on the front of mine, is that I was having troubles with my camera kind of bobbling around, and I didn't think it was in props because usually we see that when it's outside, but I was seeing it even inside, and so I started swapping out props and started looking at other things. And I did break a screw loose from the mounting on the back, so I added some welder adhesive. I recommend if you're into whoops, get some welder adhesive. Stuff works great. You spend $8 and you have 2 tubes that'll last you like 3 years or something like that. Well, I guess that depends on how much you fly, and how much you break stuff. So as I was looking to resolve the camera issue, I was kind of playing around with that front portion of the camera that looks like it's separated, and it is, but it's attached on the inside of the canopy to the lower post. So getting that little front camera flap thing out, it shouldn't come forward for one. I made a mess out of my canopy because I did pull it forward, and then putting it back, it all got loose and everything got worse as far as a stable video. So I had to use some glue on mine to shore those things back up. So if you've got one of these and you're going to be tinkering with the camera, do not pull that flap forward. That flap should go underneath, which does mean that repairs on these are going to be a little bit more time consuming because you're going to need to take more things apart. But I will say this for Emax, they did something different, and I applaud them very loudly for that. They aren't just doing what we've seen done many times before and making small iterative changes. We're going to see here as I go back to the screen how my battery is recovering above 3.5 volts. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on flight time, at least how I fly in my space at my altitude, all those environmental factors. You see I'm getting over 3.6 volts per cell now, and we got 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Next up, we have the LED gates, which these gates that you see that are the hex gates or the pathway gates, the more straight gates, those are from mobillygates.com, MOBILLY gates.com. I always spell that out because I have a tendency to say mobility, and it's not mobility, it's mobili gates. And then when we go into the unfinished portion of the basement, the really round gates that you will see as we head in there, those are from We Bleed FPV. So WeBleedFPV.com, where you can pick up those gates if you want to do some gates like that. I was fortunate enough to where we did our Christmas decorations. So a lot of those tubs you saw in the indoor flight or the previous flight, they had been pulled out of the shelves so I could stick those We Bleed FPV gates in there. And I thought that little section where I kind of go into the shelves and turn around through the two gates, that was kind of fun. And having the level changes, I think, creates a little bit more of a dynamic pathway to flying. But flying LED gates is a lot of fun. If some people will ask me about this portion doesn't have flight audio, but the previous portion did. The flight audio comes not on the quad. The quad does not have a microphone. There's no flight audio from the quad. That is from a separate camera that I use, and then I sync the DVR from the quad. It's actually through the goggles to that separate cell phone camera video, and that gives us an idea of what it sounds like when we fly them. That's the perspective of the pilot, so to speak. I crashed these a lot, and as I mentioned with the props do have a tendency to get beat up. So I think not only if you don't already have a good host of GNB27 batteries, you probably should get batteries and props in this particular case, because I do found that the props do make a big difference when it comes to how stable the FPV footage would be. It took a series of flights so I could figure out where I needed to adjust the battery voltage and what I wanted it to be at. And so I think I've had probably 40 flights on this. I think it's 10 of the GNB27 batteries. Some of them I bought, some of them I converted. So we'll get into more about the batteries when we get back to the desk. I try to front load as much as I can, because I know that on average YouTube videos, at least my videos, most of them are only watched for 5 minutes. Here's our outside flight. And this we will have flight audio with again, and you'll be able to hear the mowers and the leaves. It is fairly windy, and you'll see when I do those punch outs, we get those wavy lines across the front. I swapped out props to try to make sure I had the best props possible, but I think some of that noise is just coming through the feedback of the all-in-one flight controller. A capacitor has the potential to help with those brown lines when you're on high throttle that you see. You can kind of watch the throttle value in the top right and then compare that to what you see on screen. The higher the throttle value, the more those lines. It could be my props, though. I wouldn't rule that out. You know, I spent a majority of my time flying it inside. That's my favorite type of flying, is flying inside the house, and I spent a lot of time beating up those props. And that leads me to the next thing, is the new design of the frame. While I really applaud them for what they've done, it doesn't protect the props as much as we're used to in this 65mm form factor. And I'll show you back at the desk. Hopefully I can demonstrate that a little bit. There is another advantage to this, is that it's very rare that you can make this yaw washout. If you're not familiar with yaw washout, that is where you're doing a dive. Say you're coming down a chimney or a building or something like that, and as you're getting near the dive, at some point you're coming down and you're increasing your velocity, that the quad will suddenly pitch up, and it will usually yaw one way or another. We call that, or we have been calling that, yaw washout. And it's very it's one of those panic moments where you think you're going to crash, and essentially all you're going to do if you see that is to jam the throttle just to make sure you don't hit the deck. But I found in this case, I couldn't make it wash out unless I flew a 450 milliamp battery, and it was near the end of the battery. And I'll show you some of that dive testing that I did, kind of in a picture-in-picture back at the desk. But if you don't stick around for that, know that you can fly a 450 and do dives, but once you get a little less than halfway down the battery, because you've increased weight with the larger battery, it doesn't handle it as well. And I think part of the reason why it doesn't yaw washout is it doesn't have the traditional whoop form factor. I suspect Emax tested that. We'll look at the desk, but the whoops, or the prop protection, obviously it's not in the traditional circle shape, but it's also angled a little bit. It's not flat. So that actually gives you an advantage when flying it outside as well. I thought it handled very well. Of course, with Emax, you have a large company that has parts available for your repairs, because all quads eventually, if they're flown enough, are going to need repairs. It also comes with a good tune, because they have pilots on staff who tune these things before they're shipped out. It does come with Betaflight 4.2. That can vary over time. I've seen releases vary. You'll get at least, I think, 4.2. You may see 4.2.1 or what have you. Say you buy one in 3 months or something like that.
Now that you've seen all the flight footage, I have to show you. What do you think? Yes, no, maybe? Your fleet's full? What are your thoughts? Leave those down below. Let's hit into the details.
So I'll play that flight footage I talked about with the dive testing up in the top left-hand corner there. Also note that my antenna got a little bit chewed up. This is very, very flexible, and so I think it had a tendency to get over in the prop and get a little bit chewed up. Thankfully, I don't think my antenna was shortened or anything of that nature. I just think that this little insulation housing here got a little bit chewed up, so it might be worth your time to throw a little bit extra heat shrink over that. And I should note, if you can see that down in there, hopefully that antenna is not a UFL connected antenna, that is soldered. So you can't pluck the antenna off the VTX and then make that stiffer. With something that I've done is taken a part of a zip tie and lined it up with the antenna and then put heat shrink over that. Of course, the red wire in there, that is also for your receiver. That is how you control the quad. And then we have the typical Runcam Nano 3 in there. You see I've got some glue right in here. That is the screw that I broke. My one screw that held on is in the top right hand corner. So going back to kind of all my glue, I mentioned it in the flight, but this little section, when you have yours and it's all clean, you'll see that it has a line all the way around, and it also has this tab back here, and it seems like it's something you should just be able to pull forward. There might be a technique for it that doesn't mess it up, but I just pulled it forward trying to get it out of there. But there's a little tab that runs below the canopy, so behind the canopy and below it, and then it loops down here and connects to this little front post. So you can't just pull this out. So I'm not sure what the technique is. I haven't discovered that yet, to be able to, say you wanted to replace the camera, but you didn't want to take the entire thing apart in order to do that, which I think is probably likely that you'll need to do, because I don't see a connector on this either. I believe it's soldered to the VTX. So doing that repair while it's on here is going to be a bit of a challenge. So you're going to need to unscrew some things. Each motor has 2 screws. Something else to note, you'll need to unscrew those and then lift the frame off in order to be able to do your repairs. Also, the motors are soldered on. Hopefully you can see that right dip back in there. We've got solder for our motor wires, no connectors, so we shouldn't have any bottlenecks there. To go through some of the Betaflight stuff, I talked about the power and battery setting, and you can see that on screen there. That's what I set them to get to where when I land, I get a battery voltage at least 3.5 volts. If you don't change that, you'll find your flight time is a lot shorter, just because there is a fairly heavy load on the little 1S batteries. We have 2 profiles set up, and you have rate profiles to choose from. Rate profile 1 is geared towards maybe the early entry to your FPV journey. Rate profile 2 is another one that you can try. Maybe you haven't identified your rates. You can try either one. If you've already got your rates, you're probably just going to plug your rates in there. I bound it using the command bind_RX from the CLI. As you see there on the screen, it puts the SPI receiver in the binding mode, and then on your radio you go into your model for D8 and you bind it.
After a night's sleep, it dawned on me I should test D16 mode. Maybe this new board has got some new magic within the receiver, but unfortunately, no, it does not. D16 mode still has poor range. D8 mode is going to be the way to go. That's what I'm flying in this video. So you're going to need to go into your configuration tab of Betaflight and make sure it's set to FrSky D. FrSky_D, that is, in order to make sure you can get the maximum range potential of that SPI receiver. Otherwise, you will need to add a receiver of your own.
Your VTX tables are also set up. To unlock the VTX, you press the button on the side here. You can see hopefully that little button at the end of my finger. You press and hold that down, plug in a USB port or plug in a battery, and then you keep that button down. I think they recommend 5 or 10 seconds, and then you unplug everything or disconnect power, and your VTX should be unlocked so you can get all the channels. You can't change the power because it's only 25 milliwatts, but you can change to all the different channels, which you can see there in the VTX table. You have all the typical channels that we see in FPV. I tend to fly, this is a picture before I change anything, I tend to fly raceband 8. Raceband 8 puts you above Wi-Fi frequencies, and I find I get the best video, the cleanest image, the best range if I go with raceband 8. There might be others that work in there as well above 5800, but I tend to just go raceband 8. I do it time and time again when it comes to quads that review on the channel. So if you're having any video difficulties, I highly encourage you to use raceband 8. Some of you might be interested in the new board and the layout, and here is the board pinout. that I got from Emax. Another thing I should applaud them for is they've done something different. They've created a board which is actually more typical of what we see in this form factor, but what we've seen from Emax is a more elongated board, and now they've made something more traditional that allowed them to make a more traditional 65mm whoop type quad. But I thought it was important to bring that out because a lot of people, I think, when they see this, or when they do see this, might wonder what kind of board is inside, and with it buried inside this canopy, it's a little bit hard to see, so I wanted to highlight that. As far as the carbon fiber that's in here, you know, it's pretty stiff. It seems legit. You know, it's 65mm. We don't typically see carbon fiber. I know Newbie Drone recently released a carbon fiber plate for their Whoop frames. So Emax was, I guess, second. I know Beta FPV had one too, I think. It was more of a support, and the Newbie Drone had one for their brush series that kind of slid around the motors. That was how it braced it. So they've kind of taken a different mix of not only creating a different frame, they've also used the carbon fiber for the bottom plate. Note, all the screws are Phillips, not a favorite of mine, but at least they're consistent. They're all the same. They've also got zip ties to secure your motor wires down. That should help if you tumble through a tree. You probably get hung up with all the different things where a little branch or something can go through, but at least it won't. It's very unlikely that it will get underneath your motor wires and get you hung up that way, or pull a motor wire loose. It seems very unlikely that that would happen. They seem to be pinched on. I didn't notice them moving around at all, and just feeling them now, they feel secure and in place, so they're good and tight. That can vary depending upon assembly though as well. There is no camera angle. Camera angle is one of the things that I oftentimes look for. For me, camera angle controls my speed. So if I want to go slower, I decrease my camera angle. If I want to go faster, I increase my camera angle. It doesn't mean you have to have camera angle to go faster, to go slow, but for me, it does help if you have the ability to focus your eye line on a different portion of the screen. Then it will, that technique will allow you to go faster or go slower. For me, again, I find it easier to be able to adjust my camera in order to change my speeds, where this doesn't have any camera angle. You've got whatever that camera angle is there. I would say it's somewhere around 15 to 20, maybe 25 degrees on the camera angle. And that's also a good shot of how these whoops are kind of angled. We talked about that with the yaw washout. And a more traditional whoop, I've got kind of a Mobula 6 here. You know, you can see that that's very flat. So that's not good for flight, whereas Emax has gone to almost kind of a twisted or a flatter type of whoop protection. I think the benefit of flight is there for this, but also it's not as stiff, so you tend to bonk stuff and go through props because it's just not as hard there. I don't know how to demonstrate this. Let me move that prop. It's just stiffer all the way around. Then this is much more malleable here. It is going to provide some protection from hurting someone. It's just not, if you're flying very fast, it's not going to protect the props from taking damage. I have bent up props using this form factor as well. I just found that through all my flying that I ran out of props for this, partly because I don't have these props. I only have what come in the box, but I did think that they got bent up and out of shape quicker than I'm used to. I did fly the NanoHawk on the 450 milliamp battery, and I did find that I got about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, so a good full minute more than I got with a 300, which might not surprise you. Because you've added weight, it does fly a little different. I did not fly it with the 450 inside the house much. I just found that, you know, when you add weight, it changes the flight characteristics. But if you're flying outside or you want extra flight time, 450 milliamp battery will get you a substantial portion more flight time. I am encouraged that not only did Emax do something different in their design of the 65mm whoop category, but they also took on adding the GNB27 connector. You can pick these up from Amazon. Hopefully we'll see these at other FPV shops. If they're already available at other FPV shops, I'll link those down below. But I bought mine from Emax. And if you're curious about the GNB27 connector, we kind of started out a long time ago with PH125, and then we went to PH2, and we found that rolled pins didn't have, there was some resistance there, so your performance wasn't as good. Then we went to solid pins, and we still see some rolled pins around. And then we had BT20 come out from Beta FPV. My understanding is that is an expensive connector for battery manufacturers, and then GNB has created this GNB27 connector. means they seem to be one of the larger battery manufacturers in our hobby. I wouldn't be surprised to see more batteries, not just GNB branded batteries, have this connector on them. Unfortunately, for those of you that have a host of PH20 connectors on your batteries, it may mean you either need to come up with a short little adapter, or you may need to convert your batteries or acquire more batteries for a quad such as this, which I think this is the third Whoop type quad we've seen with the GNB27. So they seem to be becoming more prevalent. The price of this should be coming in just under $100, and when the link is available, I will add it to the video description. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.
I have dinner on my face?